welcome back to Consider This. Melisa and Sharaad here with you this evening. Now let's take a closer look at the ongoing KL summit, where leaders from some of the world's most populous Muslim majority countries are meeting. And they're meeting with the aim to address issues such as Islamophobia and poverty. But what does the KL summit tell us about the prevailing tensions within the Muslim world? To discuss this further, we have joining us on the line Umair Jamal, correspondent for the Diplomat, based in Lahore, Pakistan. Umair, thanks for joining us this evening. Now, you recently wrote a piece for the Diplomat in which you say the impetus for the KL summit is the issue of Kashmir and India's recent moves there. Now, I was wondering, could you help elaborate what you meant by that?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I mean, it has to be one of the reasons that that Kashmir issue was the part of the agenda of Mahathir Mohamad at the United Nations General Assembly's sort of address. So if we go back to what he talked about at the UN General Assembly, so he said that India had invaded and occupied Kashmir, which he declared an illegal move, an illegitimate move, and he mentioned that India needs to talk to Pakistan to resolve the issue. And so, you know, the summit was devised right after United Nations General Assembly address, and reportedly Prime Minister of Pakistan was also part of, you know, the group which actually proposed the summit. And similarly, if we look at Turkey, which is also one of the key members of this summit, they also criticized India's move in Kashmir, and they also said that India needs to talk to Pakistan to sort of, you know, you find a solution to the issue. And if we go to Iran, which is also attending the summit, Iran also in a rare criticism of India called it an ugly act and warned India, you know, to prevent confrontation with the Muslims. And this is not in India's interest that they occupy a Muslim majority region. So if combine all of that and you look at the, you know, countries participating in the summit, it becomes clear that all of these countries, they consider, you know, Kashmir is not an internal issue of India, but sort of an issue which has regional ramifications and an issue which needs to be resolved, not bilaterally, but, you know, in discussion with, you know, with Pakistan and other countries. And second, if you look at, you know, what also is happening at the summit is, you know, you have a set of states which have issues with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has a very clear position in terms of where Kashmir stands. So for Saudi Arabia, Kashmir is an internal, you know, issue of India, which does not need an external, you know, party's intervention. And that is also what India's position is, and they sort of, you know, their partnership with Saudi Arabia is, you know, is sort of have economic nature, and that is where it's all, you know, some observers have based their observations in that sort of area. And,
Umair,
you know,
if I could just interrupt you, Umair, the question of the OIC, which has been for the large part the forum for Muslim nations to come together to create a united front on terms of global issues, why wasn't that the proper forum for this discussion? Why did those countries not use the OIC to push this agenda?
Right. So Pakistan has for a long time tried to, you know, bring Kashmir to the center of Organization of Islamic Cooperation agenda. But, you know, if you recall last year, Saudi Arabia sort of invited India to OIC, and it was invited in the role of as an observer. And Pakistan, you know, opposed that move, but Saudi Arabia still bypassed Pakistan, and the other countries which bypassed Pakistan's sort of request was the states in the Gulf region. So it has had an agenda. The OIC has always looked at issues which are maybe closer to Saudi's interest and ignored issues which are not closer to Saudi interest. And that also involves, if you look at what has been happening in the last 2 years, is the issue of Yemen. So the kind of statements which have come out of OIC, they criticize the role of Houthis in Yemen, but also talk about, you know, unity and support for a regime which is closer to Saudi interests. So, you know, at OIC, the interest and, you know, the discussion have sort of focused on areas where Saudis want the discussion to be, and the other issues have been ignored. So I think that is one reason that maybe Iran, Pakistan, and other states, which they've thought about maybe organizing an event, could send a message to Saudi Arabia. OIC that is, of course, is a major forum, but there are other options as well. If the Saudi is posturing and sort of take on these issues continued as it is now.
Okay, well, let's look at the, as you put it in your article, the deliberate exclusion of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. How could that be a productive move, considering the heft that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has globally and in particular within the Muslim world? How could an exclusion, rather than, say, building bridges, been a good strategy?
Right. So I think it raises questions when you have one sort of group organizing an event, or maybe trying to develop a forum which does not have a representation of Saudi Arabia, or maybe which they are developing sort of forum which was not sort of consulted with the Saudi leadership, and then you have states attending that event. And they also have their ties have strained with Saudi Arabia over the last many years. Some in the case of Iran, this has continued for a long time. In the case of Turkey, the case of Khashoggi's murder and what has happened afterward, that is another sort of highlight of Saudi's strained ties with Turkey. And with the case of Saudi's relationship with the East Asian states, the relationship is not as warm as it was. So I think Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, has not approached these states or maybe taken into account the interests or maybe the view of these states. So I think it has more to do with Saudi Arabia not maybe listening to what these countries want in terms of the issues of the Muslim world, than these states going against Saudi Arabia. I think the point is that these states, they want to talk about issues which Saudi Arabia is not interested in. So what
Right.
do you do? You have to go somewhere and talk about it.
Okay. Umair, as you correctly pointed out a bit earlier, the KL summit was initially driven by Malaysia, Turkey, and Pakistan. Now, I'm trying to make sense of where Iran and Qatar sit in this mix. How important is the Iran-Qatar connection in this?
Right. So I think Iran's role is, I wouldn't say is central in the summit, but Iran wouldn't mind, maybe attending or participating in a summit where Saudi Arabia is not present, or maybe which Saudi Arabia opposes. If you look at what is being discussed at the summit, is that we are discussing issues of Islamophobia, we are discussing issues where Muslim world is divided. And when you look in the Muslim world, Saudi Arabia's role has been quite dominant in terms of the Middle Eastern crisis and the question of Yemen and what is happening there. Right. And so in that regard, Iran's position is quite clear. They would sit at any summit or forum where if such issues are brought to the attention of the world. And so I think in that regard, so Iranians wouldn't mind, but would they be willing to support, sort of an alternative to OIC? That depends on, who else is willing to, look at that.
Yeah, on that score, Umair, do you think
Yep.
the KL summit has any realistic chance of becoming a rival to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC?
Well, at the moment, I don't think it has a sort of that vision, but it depends, if this summit becomes a regular thing, and the more and more states they develop alienation in terms of what OIC is not doing. So maybe every other year, states come to the KS summit and they talk about issues which are not being discussed at the OIC. Then again, that could undermine the country's relationship with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia would not appreciate that. So I think it may be a one-off kind of event, but it's definitely a signal for Saudi Arabia that they need to hear what other states have to say, for which the OIC is a place, but it's not doing its job properly. So I think it's sort of at this phase it's sort of a messaging But maybe in the next few years, if this continues to happen, this could develop into something.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Umair, for joining us this evening and sharing your insights about the KL summit. Now, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more on Consider This. Don't go anywhere.